After months of relentless coverage asserting that Joe Biden is not mentally fit to serve as president, the Fox propaganda network is visibly struggling to deal with the fact that a majority of Americans also believe that Donald Trump is not mentally fit to serve as president. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert buttons before you go. I'd greatly appreciate it. All right, friends, we have several clips to play in this video, including this most recent one involving Martha MacCallum, who is, like Bret Baier, allegedly one of the straight Fox News journalists, somebody who's not like Jesse Waters or Laura Ingraham, somebody who's just really interested in the hard facts. And watching her struggle with this disconnect, right, is so amusing because for months, the Fox propaganda network has led the charge suggesting or asserting, depending on who's speaking at the time, that President Biden is not mentally fit to serve as president. Okay. Now, in 2020, there were questions about both Trump's fitness and Joe Biden's fitness. And at the time, polling suggested that Joe Biden enjoyed a considerable advantage over Donald Trump in the 2020 election. Now, after, again, months, if not years of relentless propaganda, the polling is now opposite. Donald Trump enjoys a relative advantage over Joe Biden in terms of polling with respect to mental fitness, which is ludicrous, right? It's preposterous given all the crazy things Trump says on a daily basis, and also just his general lack of intelligence, right? Now, President Biden's media campaign, his reelection campaign, is making an aggressive, concerted effort to at least close the gap in terms of perception, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But now that, poll after poll after poll suggests that a majority of Americans think that neither candidate are mentally fit to serve as president, the Fox propaganda network is struggling. And so I want to play this clip. It's about 2 minutes long, in which Martha MacCallum and two other right-wing commentators are sparring with Philip Raines, who is a former advisor to Secretary Hillary Clinton.
4 years older or 8 years older than they were at that time. In terms of their cognitive ability, look, I'm not a doctor, but I would say this. Just based on observation, it's impossible to make an observation about Joe Biden only that you can't apply to Donald Trump. So to the extent that there's anything, and I don't think that there is anything wrong with Joe Biden, I hope when I'm 81, I'm in his shape both mentally and physically.
Philippe, hold on. Let me just ask you something here. So, like I've said before, it's not a big deal if someone has a verbal flub once in a while. It happens all the time. These moments of deer in the headlights.
With which one of
what's
them?
going
It happens
on.
with both of them.
It does occasionally, but
Martha,
you can look at the polls, Philippe,
happen.
and the polls tell us that most people think that Donald Trump is more fit to run again. And you know as well as I do that, one 77 or 80-year-old is totally different from another in terms of their ability. And I'm literally just looking at what we're learning from the polls, right? 35% Trump is fit, but Biden is not. OK, and I could bring up a number of.
Look at that. OK, look at that. Sorry. Look at that poll that she brings up, because we're going to come back to that. Just really want to draw attention to it.
Of these in terms of who they think is fit. And it's really, I think, based on just how he performs when he gets up there. And also the fact, Philippe, that he doesn't sit down and just do regular interviews and into a Super Bowl interview. And it appears that the White House is a little bit nervous about putting him out there, fearful of what might happen.
I have to respectfully disagree. I think you're jumbling a bunch of things together, which in all fairness is exactly what Washington, D.C. and New York and all the political capitals are doing.
I'm just looking at the poll numbers.
Has no cognitive.
I'm looking at the poll numbers.
Okay, so the poll numbers. Well, so the poll numbers also show all sorts of things, including that if Donald Trump is convicted of anything, that a third of Republicans lose. So if this is about two men facing each other, there are two different things going on here. There's a choice between two people, and they are not Gavin.
So Philippe Raines, who is arguing in President Biden's defense here, I understand what he's getting at, and he's doing a decent job, but I would argue he actually concedes entirely too much. There are not two different things going on here. There's the same thing, plus a whole bunch of other things with respect to Trump. But I want to go back to Martha MacCallum's poll specifically. This isn't the only poll. But so 35% say that Trump is fit and Biden is not. 32% that neither are fit. And then Biden is fit, but Trump is not, 23%. So if you take there the polling about Trump, the people who say he's not fit, 32 and 23%, that's 55%, a majority of Americans, according to Martha McCallum's own poll. And she doesn't draw any attention to it whatsoever. She just says more Americans believe, according to the polling, that Donald Trump is more mentally fit than Joe Biden. And she's free to make that case, but it is so dishonest to not draw attention to the fact that, well, if you're talking about the perception of Americans, why are you glossing over the fact that a majority of Americans believe that Donald Trump is not fit for office either? See how they move the goalposts? Because for the longest time, it was Americans don't believe that Joe Biden is fit for office. The majority of Americans don't believe that Joe Biden is fit for office. But now that a majority of Americans believe that neither of them are fit for office, they don't want to draw any attention to the fact that Trump is not seen as mentally fit for office, according to a majority of Americans either. I want to play another clip here. This is a Democratic congresswoman who I believe is also, it's not Martha McCallum that she's talking to, it's Dana Perino, again, another supposed straight news journalist, about this hypocrisy.
And I also am sick and tired of everybody talking about his age. When you look at the age of Donald Trump, which is only a couple of years younger, who's got 91 felony accounts against him and goes on rants that make no sense. The one that he did a week ago said...
But again, you can see Dana Perino saying, well, what about the only difference that I would say with respect to both Philippe Rines and also the Democratic Congresswoman, I think her name was, I'm blanking on her name, Debbie Dingell, is I don't think they should actually concede or even implicitly the argument about Trump's mental fitness. I think they should actually hammer it home because, again, poll after poll after poll shows that neither of these men are perceived as being particularly fit to serve as president within the eyes of the American people. As a matter of fact, and we talked about this poll in a couple of videos in the past, ever since President Biden's reelection campaign has begun to relentlessly hammer Donald Trump on this fact, we've actually seen a reduction in the confidence that people have in Trump's mental fitness. So again, this is from back in January. In terms of attributes, has the mental sharpness it takes to serve effectively as president. 28% say Joe Biden does, 47% say Donald Trump does. But that means that a majority of Americans, according to this other poll from Langer Research back in January, 53% of Americans at the time back in January believe that Donald Trump is not mentally fit for office. And as they point out, Trump's ratings for mental sharpness and physical health are both down 7 points from last May. Because, folks, when attention is actually drawn to the various insane, fascistic, incoherent things that Donald Trump says on a regular basis, Martha McCallum says, well, every now and then, occasionally, Donald Trump says something wacky. That's just simply not true. He goes on incoherent rants all the time. And it's gaffe after gaffe after gaffe. And by the way, it wasn't the Biden-Harris campaign that really started to draw attention to it. Credit where it's due. Ron DeSantis's his Twitter account's war room, when Ron DeSantis was running against Donald Trump, when he finally started to take the gloves off, they had thread after thread after thread after thread cataloging all of the crazy, incoherent things that Donald Trump said. Donald Trump's lack of mental fitness for office is such an established fact that even Megyn Kelly, who practically worships Donald Trump, who gave him just this softball interview, just foist praise upon him, grades him on a curve, even she says he's lost a step.
But there's no question Trump has lost a step or multiple steps. He is confusing Joe Biden for Obama. I know he's now saying he intentionally did that. Go back and look at the clips. It wasn't intentional.
It wasn't intentional. Even Megyn Kelly says so. So listen, I understand there's a lot of work to be done here. I understand that the polling perception with mental fitness, right or wrong, still favors Donald Trump, but there's ground to be gained here. We've seen it. We've seen ever since the media has been forced to pay more attention to the stupid, crazy things that Donald Trump says. We've seen a 7-point reduction, perhaps even more than that. So the Biden-Harris campaign is right to relentlessly hound this. The media is right to report on this. If you're going to talk about the mental fitness of presidential candidates, fine, but do so with objectivity. If both candidates show signs of making gaffes or verbal missteps and miscues, then you have an obligation, I would argue, to talk about both. And if you still want to acknowledge that the polling perception favors one over the other, fine, but at least acknowledge it. And by the way, this isn't something for the Fox Propaganda Network. The Fox Propaganda Network will always grade Trump on a curve because they're ideologically driven to do so. The mainstream media has struggled with covering this for months and months and months. They like to make it a case to create some sort of false equivalence. Well, Donald Trump is clearly an authoritarian. He's clearly a fascist. That's one thing. So we don't want to be seen as, as having liberal bias. We've got to give Biden something. Biden is senile. That's how the mainstream media seems to pitch it. Biden's senility versus Trump's fascism. When the reality is that if you want to draw attention to Biden's mental fitness, whatever your perception is, you can also do that with Trump. As not John Favreau, it was John Lovett from Pod Save America said months ago, and I loved it. He said, your choice in November 2024 is not old versus crazy. It's old versus crazy and old, and that's Trump. So anyway, I love seeing the Fox Propaganda Network struggle to deal with this. I think that surrogates for Democrats need to do a better job of relentlessly hammering it and not conceding the ground. They should say, listen, Megyn or Martha or whoever you happen to be talking to, Dana Perino, maybe Donald Trump enjoys an advantage in this respect, but is really not much of one, given that a majority of Americans also think that he's not fit for office. So whether or not you think this is an issue, whether or not you think that this is an issue he does better on than Biden, it's still an issue for Donald Trump, whether you like it or not. And I think that more people need to be much more blunt about that and not give any ground whatsoever. Let me know what you think in the comments.